Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Thank you, and welcome to another exceptional panel as we start to explore the gender data gap in the startup ecosystem. Today's panel is extremely exciting because there's a lot of things that we can't do without corporate support. And we have some amazing panelists here representing HSBC and Salesforce today. And I'm excited to hear their opinions on a lot of things. But before we get into that, I do want to give notice to where I'm actually presenting from. I'm in Collingwood, and Collingwood resides within the territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes Chippewas, the Nawash Unceded First Nation, and the Saugeen First Nation, and is home to many Indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. So welcome today. And Kara and Nita, if you can turn on your cameras, that would be spectacular. I'm very kind of keen to kind of take a different path today and navigate through the support that corporations provide to startups at a very influential level, right when they're kind of coming out to us and opening up to new possibilities. Kara, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell me just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about HSBC?
Hi, thank you very much for having me here. So I am with HSBC Asset Management. We've recently launched a venture and growth investment strategy, and we've launched a fintech VC fund. Very exciting. But previously, we've been doing strategic investments on behalf of the bank, so investing in third parties or companies that support the bank. And prior to that, I've had a long history trading buy side and sell side.
Thank you very much, Anita.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here, and happy International Women's Day to all of you. So I like to say this, right? I mean, my entire career has been in financial services, technology, and consulting space. All the gray hair, all the wrinkles you see on me are from this industry. Over the years, I call myself a global citizen because over the years, I've lived in the US. Originally, I'm from India. I've lived in Australia and now in the UK. And one thing that came up consistently is how the women entrepreneurs, the challenges they face. And that's really what the cause that I start up for. Engineered the exit of 2 companies in my career. I am an angel investor and biased towards women-led businesses. And my role at Salesforce is financial services transformation advisor. So we are trying to disrupt the financial services with technology as an enabler.
And I love that word right there as an enabler. I think that's right there is a very empowering word. And I think I'm going to start with you, Nita. What is your entrepreneurial journey? What's the real reason that you started on your entrepreneurial journey?
I mean, it's very difficult to point one reason, right? But as I said, right, I mean, I've lived around the world, and over the years, one thing that really stood out for me is no matter the region, no matter the country, the challenges that women face, whether it's their career growth or as women entrepreneurs with limited access basically to the funding and investments, right? That actually was my biggest trigger. I mean, if you look at the stats around the world, they're quite shocking that women entrepreneurs get, right? I mean, in UK alone, right, the Bank of England had published some stats last year which said that for every £1 that is invested, only 1 pence goes to all women-led businesses, or 10 pence would go to mixed gender-led businesses, right? So after engineering the exit of 2 companies, right, and my career so far, I think that's the challenge that I wanted to stand up for. That I think has become one of my key drivers.
And I think that that's really important. One of the stats is also 3% of funding actually goes to female founders. So it is something that's done on a global level that we are seeing change for. And I appreciate the support from companies like yours and from a bank like HSBC as well. What would be the biggest motivation to your entrepreneurial journey? What was the real reason you started on your entrepreneurial journey, Kara?
Well, it's like I have to say, I am as less, I should say, less focused as Nita is, and partly it might be a reflection of the industry as being very male dominated. It really was an issue of just being there, being able to do and function. And so, but I will say that right now, in the seat of being an investor, we are here to support entrepreneurs and their teams. And we know that diverse teams and diverse leadership lead to positive outcomes. I mean, it's just manifest in how the decisions they make, how they deal with the world around them, their clients, their customers, and it's a good thing. And so, we do have this actually as a metric supporting gender diversity and racial diversity and orientation diversity in our companies. Now, I mean, as background goes, I mean, like as I said before, my background had primarily been in trading before this investment, and I will say that it's everybody's running kind of a little business, an entrepreneur business, if you may, but one thing that was somewhat frustrating or a bit of a mystery at the time was like, well, how do you get resource to do anything? How is it that it's a little bit zero sum, right? How do I get something that may or may not take away from others? And the reality is to, once you're in a position where you get to see the everything, it's a little bit less about like, how do I get something so somebody else doesn't? It's actually seeing how do we get bigger benefits than just kind of like, seeing, a dollar here versus a dollar there. And that's actually something I'd like to speak to, later because, again, I think that a lot of resistance to these sort of proactive, diversity measures is about, oh, it might be at my, you know, detriment for me to sort of support that. And that I'd really like people to not think that way.
And I think that's really powerful. And I really love that statement when you're in a position to see everything. And a lot of times we don't actually recognize that we might be in a position to see everything. And diversity infused or diversity influenced, it seems to be a bit of the perspective that you two are providing today. And I think that's a very strong narrative to kind of flow from. When was the first time that you considered or had to consider gender in a business decision that you made? Nita, we'll start with you.
So I'll share a very personal story. And it's more than business decision. It's about the realization of the gender disparity that can come in, right? And then we'll talk a bit more about the business decisions too. So this was, I think, when I was in my early 30s, right, in my career, and one of my ex-employers, I was put up for a promotion, and in the company at that time, we had to panel for VP level and above promotions, right? So I went in for my panel, I did my panel, and all of that happened. And the feedback from the panelists were like amazing, feedback and things like that. But the senior most person on the panel said to me, all is great. We have been watching you. Your growth has been phenomenal. The output and the things that you've been delivering is great. We know you understand the business and the industry. But what's holding us back from giving you this promotion is you're too young. And if you stand in front or alongside with your male, peers, you would really look very young, and that would put you at basically on a backseat. And I was completely taken aback by that statement, right? And that made me realize, there's so many biases, hidden biases that are at various stages that we women have to encounter, right? I immediately stood up to that statement by saying that, so are you saying my age comes in before then the output and the business that I deliver to the company? Of course, I mean, I got my promotion, but the point is, I had to fight for it, right? When I know, and the company knew that I deserved it. And that was primarily because of the bias that comes in. So that's, my problem, or the point I'm trying to come to, is these subconscious or unconscious biases are so well entrenched into, even if they are not intentional, they keep coming in on our business decisions, right? And that's not just about men doing that, it's even women doing that. And that's something that we have to become more mindful of.
And I think that's really important. I'm just going to share a link as well. We have this unconscious bias, and even as investors, there's an article here on it. Investors, whether they're male or female, will ask biased questions to female founders that tend to be preventative rather than promotional. So one of the things that we've kind of seen from the other panels so far, and just in conversations over the last couple of weeks, is how to be able to change what might be a negative question or a negative comment into something that's promotional. And the example that we've been using is for a founder to be asked, this is a very saturated market. How do you tend to compete? There's just so much competition there. And as opposed to go, oh, well, I compete with these guys. Are you asking about my go-to-market strategy? So you've got your toolbox, you've got your confidence, and you tackle it head on. The only response they can give is a yes. So we're trying to encourage everybody to meet the response of these negative questions with a positive promotional outlet. So I think that kind of flows nicely from what you were saying, Nita.
And Cindy, that's such a valid point that you bring out, right? Especially like I sit on a lot of these panels, right, where on pitch nights, etc. And one of the things I think is so important is women when they make their pitches, right? Women entrepreneurs, and I'm sure Kara, you're going to share a few stories too, as you have your venture fund for fintechs, right? But when they make these pitches, right? I mean, I have seen how underconfident they are, and it's not that they don't know their subjects, it's not that they don't understand the industry, but they play on a defense mechanism rather than showing their capabilities and their business idea and the business as a whole, right? So that coaching and that awareness is so necessary, that irrespective of these biases and these questions that come on when you're looking for investments and growth, try to put a positive spin and move in that direction, because that's really how you can address it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Kara, when was the first time you saw gender bias in a business decision?
Well, oh goodness. I would say, rolling back quite a bit far, I think that the environment that I was in and was, how should I say, very male dominated again at the time. And so the natural reaction is to sort of neutralize or to blend in. And to the extent actually that one of my managers in the nicest way possible said, pretty much I was like one of the guys, because he was actually replying to another person who had been, I don't know, discussing me for whatever work-related reason. But one thing that sort of disturbed me is like I could understand how that was, when I graduated out of uni. It's not good, but it was. But even not too long ago, I mean, I've done mentorship of all sorts of students, grads, and younger colleagues. And one of them said, she felt uncomfortable having that she was being asked to go out for drinks with the guys. I mean, she was the only female in that business. And I was like, well, why are you being compelled to go? And it was just like, because that's what you do, is what was explained, to like kind of spend your external time hanging out with the guys, doing guy things like after work. And I was just like, well, that was actually kind of inappropriate for even that particular desk manager to ask. And I think that in the past year or two, that there have been some conscious efforts to, not just at our organization, but other organizations, to root out, well, okay, this was completely well intended. It was meant to, for social, but the environment might not have been the right choice for a mixed gender environment, or even, let's say, even forget gender, people who don't want to drink, right? And so, so again, it's like being more mindful of context is something that people need to be better about. But again, it's like this is just one anecdote of many, how gender sort of like kind of popped up. I mean, and it would have an impact in this particular woman's situation, because whether or not she would go from being I guess, what was effectively a rotation to being hired into the team because she did or didn't socialize would matter. That's a business decision. And we don't want to create situations where people don't get like not just promoted, but even get into the first rung of their job because they didn't engage in certain behaviors.
And I think that that's really really poignant is the bro culture or all of trying to be like one of the guys. It's really on us for us to stand up and say, well, this is my version of the work environment, and I can appreciate that companies like HSBC and Salesforce are actually making it more comfortable to be somebody diverse, right? In a work environment that was for the longest time created for men, right? I have a spectacular book that I'd like to recommend. I just finished reading it. It's called "The Uterus is a Feature, Not a Bug," and it talks about being yourself as the truest person that you can be, and to be able to stand up in a work environment and say, "This is not my environment. I don't want to go down that path. Go out for that drink if you're not a drinker. Go out for that into that environment that you're not comfortable with." So I think that that's a very supportive environment to be able to say, no, that's not my comfort zone. So I guess from that next step, then we've kind of have a few different lenses just by the nature of who we are. What aspects of gender diversity or just diversity in general, what aspects or parts of that lens are we missing from your perspective? And Nita, I will start with you.
Sure, Cindy. I mean, I think, this is a very interesting question. I'll tell you why, right? I mean, even till date, when you talk about diversity, right? A lot of people, and these are pockets, right? People think diversity is just about gender diversity, right? Male, female diversity. There are people who even justify all men-driven teams or leadership teams as a diverse team because they would say there's a skill set diversity coming into play here, right? In my opinion, I think diversity, when you put the diversity lens on, it's actually a whole lot of things, right? It's not just about the gender diversity. It's also about the diversity of thoughts, skills, ethnicity, access to education, access to wealth, access to opportunity. What's the background, right? I mean, all of these things come into play. And I think that's one of the key things when you think about gender gap as a whole. When you collect data on gender gap, right, all of these factors and all of these lenses need to be looked at. How have people from different ethnicities, how have people from different genders, how have people with different education and different access to wealth really come and build their life and career and things, and what are the opportunities and platforms that they're getting, right? That's really what it should be. I mean, I think when you think about equal opportunities, it's a combination of all of these things that should be considered.
Indeed, indeed. And my daughter actually a couple of years ago brought me this picture, which was an amazing visual for me. And it was of these three boxes, and on the other side of the wall was this game. And the man stood up on the box, all equal sizes, and was able to see over with ease. The woman stood up on the box and was unable to see over the wall at all. And the person in a wheelchair was unable to even get up on the box. So our version of diversity, our version of equity and equality really needs to kind of change to be more infused or influenced by diversity. Kara, what parts of the lens are we missing?
Well, I mean, I first want to say I'm extremely proud of my colleagues for in the past year, 2 years even, they've self-assembled groups on their own time to discuss uncomfortable questions and rooting out, okay, well, what is the gap? What are the gaps? Why are the gaps? Can we assess this? Can we analyze this? And so, and that actually was culminated in, findings for the management, for them to actually have some information to, like, say, okay, what can we do better? And I think that, one big takeaway is that, this idea of gender gap is contextual. And it becomes quite a bit more apparent in a multi country organization, multi country, multicultural. It's like it matters for all the things that Nita said, like, there's different facets and different perceptions. And again, as I said before, it's like also people understanding that it's not zero sum. But one thing that I'd like to sort of, so we have to do this. Like we kind of have to ask the uncomfortable questions, go through the uncomfortable phase. Might feel that you are creating opportunity for other people. At No, it's not at the at your uh, lack of benefit. But one thing that I per Nita's suggestion earlier, which is to say that you don't create false diversity situations, because one thing that is quite upsetting is when people go through the motions, for example, hiring, and then they'll go through a long list, and then they'll go through a short list, and then you go put all this energy into having a fantastic female candidate on the short list, and then you find after all that, it was really just sort of the motions of kind of when somebody had been pre-selected. And I think that people really need to go into these decisions in earnest, objectively, and not do what is tempting to do, which is to like kind of game the system. But so that would be one of the big asks that I would have of everybody.
I really like what Kara said, right? It's moving away from the lip service and manipulating the data, right? In a way, right? We all have encountered these kind of situations, right, Kara, where we've seen that either the shortlisted candidate is a woman and she comes till the final stage, or there is this excuse that comes in, I am not finding women candidates. And it's not that recruiter's fault rather, it's the entire algorithm, that entire chain, right? Where there are, built-in biases from a search filtering criteria and all of that, right? So you can't blame one person for it, but it's just the process. But I've heard the statement so many times, I'm waiting for female candidates, profiles to come in, but I can't find any in the industry. I'm like, seriously? So that surprises me all the time. But I would like to add just one more point, right? While we talk about diversity and importance of diversity, I think it's extremely important for organizations to also think about an inclusivity element, because when you think about different cultures and different diverse genders, diverse background, building that team, while we know it's really important and we know it adds a lot of value, as Kara had mentioned earlier, it's also important to build that inclusive environment in the organization. For this to be really productive, for this diverse team to be productive, you have to respect each other's cultures and each other's backgrounds and each other's choices, and the organizations actually have to drive that inclusive behavior from the top. You can't expect just the teams to okay, fine, we're all from different cultures and different backgrounds, and we'll get along and give the productivity that is asked out of us. It's actually coming from top down, is what I feel, from driving that inclusivity culture.
And I think that's a really powerful statement. We have to drive it from the top. We have to respect and build that in. We have to confront uncomfortable questions, and all these aspects really kind of build in the difference between saying, and as you said, Nita, the lip service side of it, right, and into actionable change, because only when you build in the respect and understanding, or that there is this diversity infused team, that you can actually make diversity infused decisions that reflect the whole company, right? Because that's what we're trying to achieve, is that diversity, diversely influenced and diversity infused decisions. And that's what kind of permeates through everything. And I guess that's where I want to lead for the next question is, having kind of thought about these, thinking about these few different aspects, how do we then, with this new lens, what should we be doing as a first step to make these gender infused decisions happen? And I think, Kara, I want to go to you a little bit more, because I'm very curious about the boards or the committees that you have started up at HSBC, to kind of see, what does that uncomfortable question scenario look like, in terms of how that coming together and saying, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're trying to reframe how we look at things.
Well, companies now, at least in the UK, are targeting, a particular gender percentage, and to be very fair, if this hadn't already been, I believe, a government mandate, companies would still be dragging their feet. But now that it is, it's like people are like, okay, well, I can set this as a KPI. But that does, I have heard from, the industry that, people feel a bit put out. Let's say, oh, I can't help the fact that I was white, male, of a certain age, or you could have white male privileged and underprivileged, but the privilege hasn't been factored into, if the KPI is around gender. That's a very fair statement, to say, like, okay, well, it's one thing to set thresholds, but it's another thing to weigh on merit. And so it's like there has to be a bit of work around that too. That said, I mean, like, the other thing that's sort of I guess this is for large corporates in general. You can fall into the trap of, like, well, you've got a large body of staff, and oh yes, over the course of over the entire organization, you're doing great on the gender ratio, but that's not necessarily true up at the upper levels of management. And again, it's like, you really need to have that kind of like consistency up and down, the seniority ranks. Otherwise, it risks being a bit disingenuous. But, again, it's like, as I said before, I'm very proud of my colleagues for having raised this, brought this up, and made this an agenda item for management. And they've carried it out. To the great credit of management, they've actually set targets for themselves to lead.
That's good. And we will actually get into the metric side of things, because that's one thing I'm very curious about as well. Nita, from your perspective, what is having this new lens? And I love the analogy of the top-down component of it. What are some of the first steps that we can put into place?
I mean, exactly like Kara said, right? I mean, at Salesforce too, we are very, very, equality is one of our core values, and it's not a lip service, right? We really live and breathe it. And I mean, this is one of our key metrics too. The management at all levels are now looking to hire and build diverse teams. And it's not just about gender diversity. It is about diversity in various forms, right? And each of us, I mean, I don't know, this is a public information. So I'm sure you know how we put up our goals and missions for the year, right? And so it starts from the top. It starts from Mark Benioff and Brett Taylor levels, and then we all look at it and take it up downwards. So it's like the top down. And exactly to what Kara said, right? One of the key things that we are looking at, and we're looking at it in the industry, we're looking at it in Salesforce, we're looking at it with clients, with my Women in Banking and Finance hat on, as a board member of Women in Banking and Finance. One of the things that we're pushing financial organizations is to start thinking about not just at the bottom of the pyramid, right? There has to be diversity at all levels of the pyramid, if you will. You just can't put a tick by saying we have 30% or 40% gender diversity. And when you look under the hood, it's all at the early stage of their career kind of phase, right? It has to be across. But it's very difficult for me to say it's the first step part, Cindy, to be honest, right? I think there are multiple small steps, and it really depends organization to organization. But I think there are multiple small steps that will that will drive these changes, right? If you will, right? Some of these are, of course, the KPIs driving it from the top to say that, okay, we have to have the gender diversity, put it up as a part of your KPIs or your goals, and your performance-based appraisals or bonuses would be tied up to that. But along with that, it's also about building that awareness, building sponsorship for women, nurturing talent internally. How many women are growing within the organization? It's okay to hire women, but how are you making them feel inclusive? How are you nurturing their growth paths? What are you doing and influencing as an organization to take them to the board level, if you will, right? It's about driving some of these key changes too. And I think one of the key things that I often see in the financial services industry is the lack of sponsorship, right? I mean, it's changing, it's improving a lot, but how do you build that sponsorship within the organization and in the industry as a whole, right? So I think it's a lot of these many steps or small steps that need to be taken. Change won't happen in a day, I know that, but it can't take us 200 years to change too.
And I think that's really powerful, again, because it's the influence that's important, as opposed to doing these drastic changes, where often society kind of takes a back, going, "Oh, this is happening so fast." I guess in that same vein, how do we recruit to be able to affect this change, to help this change happen faster? And I'll take that to you, Nita, just because it's a nice transition from what you just said.
Sure. I mean, I think, look, Kara mentioned this, right? Especially in the financial services industry, even in tech, right? It's very male dominated. So you can't try to drive the change by ignoring that, right? I mean, men, the other gender, right? So I think it's very important to think about how do we influence them, bring men as allies, drive or educate men to become more allies and champions, right? I really think it is the job of the women who made it to the top also. I mean, that's another aspect, right? People who have reached there, women who have reached there, they need to push these changes. They need to drive for gender equity. They need to drive more championship and sponsorship. I mean, I'll give you a simple example, and I'm sure, Kara, you've faced these scenarios, right? When I go in meetings and I'm the only woman in that meeting, I don't challenge them openly, but I make a cheeky comment at just saying that I wish I had more, women in this room. And I can see the men literally shifting in their seats, explaining, "Oh, I have 30% women in my team. I have 10% women in my team." Okay, where are they, right? And I just smile and I leave it there, right? I challenge some of my male allies who are appearing on all male panels not to step onto all male panels. There should be diverse panels, right? I think these small things are important, but I think it's very important when you talk about the changes for the future and faster changes. I think it also needs to start in our education system. If you're thinking about faster, expedited change, I think our education system needs to be looked at too, right? I mean, teaching the importance of gender equality, teaching the importance of managing your finances and managing your investments. I think it should become really mandatory at an early age, right? And that, I think, is going to become a key factor to drive accelerated change, if you will.
I was just actually looking up a book. It's what is it called here? The Mother of Invention: How Good Ideas Get Ignored in an Economy Built for Men by Katrina Marcel. And I bring that book up because you talked about the education side of things, and starting from the baseline when children are in their formative years, because women have historically been left out of history and left out of education. So if we were trying to infuse a diverse opinion or diverse thought process or building diverse companies, perhaps that's where we want to really get started. And then from Kara, from your perspective, and building out who needs to be recruited to be able to affect this change?
Well, one thing that my colleagues have been keen on increasing recruitment of is basically going to non-traditional places, because meaning going to recruiting at unis where you might not be, let's the standard, I've chosen, let's say, finance. It's like, because you already will have certain biases that were entrenched in that self-selection. So why do you need to go there? Go to other places to see if you can gather diversity there of all kinds, gender included. And then and also in when in meeting, well, I think work from home and hybrid working has helped with this a lot. But when you have meetings, to Nita's point, like she's the only woman there, well, why don't you bring in a junior? Why don't you have like all, it's like they don't need to say anything, but the fact that they're present means that they can learn, they can listen, and then this will be basically institutional knowledge that they carry with them. Because again, as Nita said before, it's like all these biases didn't happen like overnight. So it won't like happen overnight. You could reverse them, but we need to make actionable, change in our daily lives at every moment. And this doesn't hurt anybody. This only helps. And so taking action like that. But one big thing that we need to be mindful of is that there are a lot of women who drop out at the senior management levels because they have children, and then literally getting off the escalator, just completely impacts their decision to keep going. And so this is different from country to country, but we need to have some policies that allow women to be able to work and not have to choose between, oh, do I manage my family or do I manage my career? I believe there was an FT article not too long ago where they were saying like, well, they have a demographic issue in Japan because women have gone to work but they've forfeited having children. I'm like, the fact that this is even like sort of like a decision as stark as that you have to make is it's outrageous. And something has to be done about that, because otherwise you'll have this consistent pattern that persists on and on and on. And again, just to throw more anecdotes, talk about outraged. I was completely outraged that a very good friend of mine had difficulty getting pregnant, and she finally did, but it's still high risk, but she's afraid to tell colleagues about this because she's afraid that potential ramifications on her job. And this is the most qualified lady I could think of in her space. But that she still has this fear isn't right. But again, it's because of all sorts of things. So there has to be a support network, not just necessarily the corporates, but in policy and also within teams. It has to be made clear, this is how we support our colleagues.
And that support again brings about that infused decisions, right? Infused, influenced, diversity influenced decisions. And we've kind of been leading to this one question the whole time, and we're back to metrics. So, what type of metrics should we be looking at? Should we be putting in place or are in place to be able to? What type of rate of return do we want to kind of look at from that, or objectives and key results? What type of components should we be looking at from that perspective? Carol, I'll start with you this time.
Oh goodness, this is going to be a hard one because no one really wants to be pinned down to something that's very challenging, because once you have a metric, you're tied to an outcome. That said, the easy ones or I don't want to call, they're not really that easy, but again, like percentages at various levels of seniority. Also, progression is also another one. It's an observable. It's like that those are like the stats. And we have spoken already about like policies and making sure that people have ability to have balance. And again, all this is good, but I am also sympathetic to small, medium enterprises where they don't have the luxuries of large corporates that Nita and I are at. And so there has to be quite a bit of thinking, at the policy level or trades industry levels to say like, okay, how do we help companies deal? Because you can easily run into, this is all good and well that we talk about having KPIs and policies and all that sort of thing, but if you can't actually run a business with this layered on top, what can we do to alleviate that?
Thank you. I think that that's good. Percentages and progression, I think, are two very, very, very viable metrics that we should be looking at right now. Nita, from your perspective.
I think both these points that Kara mentioned are absolutely valid points, right? And I really like the statement that Kara had mentioned earlier is actionable accountability. And I think that also brings in some metrics. I mean, we're talking about things like sustainability and sustainable finance, right? And D&I is a big charter there when you think about sustainable finance. So how do you measure that, right? Rather than just providing a tick in the box kind of an activity. So I think associating controls and policies, as Kara mentioned, right, against that is very key. And that brings me to another point that, we did some stats check in Women in Banking and Finance, and I'm quite shocked. Just in the UK, only 10% of the young women in the age group of about 16 to 20 or 21 would consider joining financial services as their future career option. So when you talk about sustainable finance and then your pipeline itself is so dry, how are you going to achieve your sustainable finance, right? And that really scares me, right? So I think it's about driving it. I keep coming back to the roots, right? I mean, call it my technical hat on, right? I think you have to do the root cause analysis. Are you driving influence at the ground level? Are you driving younger generation to consider financial services as a career option? And then taking it up from there, right? Exactly to what Kara said, which comes to, how are you helping them progress and how are you helping them come into the organization? So those 2 points. But the third point I would like to also add is access to finance. Especially when it comes to women entrepreneurs. That's again a measurable point, right? I mean, how many women entrepreneurs are getting their investments, and how are you measuring the return of investments against these women, the women entrepreneur community, like what are the return on investments that they're yielding, because that becomes a very attractive point for the VCs and the private equity firms and for the angel investors, right? So I think that's another angle that we could look at to drive KPIs.
Absolutely. And they've actually, I'm sorry, I don't remember the stat right off the top. I do have an article on it, but it talks about the return on investment from investors into female-led companies is significantly higher. I don't remember how much, but enough that it will make a big difference because they end up succeeding and going farther. And that might also play around with the statistic that 3% of female founders are invested, but you can guarantee that the ones that are invested in, there's a reason for it.
and you're right. I read a similar article, right? Entrepreneurs that basically exited their business wanted to support more diverse founder groups, right? So that is one aspect, which is great. But along with that, I think the push that PEs and VC firms are also getting from the investors themselves, right? Like investors are asking, and I'm sure, Kara, you're seeing this as you have your venture fund. The investors are asking for more diverse, investments like women-led businesses or gender-diverse teams, which is pushing the VCs and the PEs to start hiring more women investors or partners in their firms, which again is a positive change towards that, right? But I think we need to start measuring some of these things to see how this can be a quantifiable change in the industry.
Indeed. And has this conversation, this panel, galvanized your thinking around gender, or are you just getting started? And Kara, I'm going to start with you for this one.
Well, I'm very happy that we have been very supportive of female founders in our investments. But it's like I mean, as Nita said, it's like we need to do more, and we are most definitely in asset management getting grilled on like, okay, how are you reflecting it not only in your personnel but actually down to the investments. And so, one space that we're looking into intensely is how do we get better data around these ESG aspects. And so, because again, it's like if you don't measure it, you can't monitor it, and so you need to have something to benchmark against. And so there are a lot of interesting, data providers and data collectors that are arising in the market that help investors with this task. I mean, look, the same thing was said about climate, right? It's like, if you don't put your money where your mouth is, things don't change. And so, and then finally, you have, people making big pronouncements on like, okay, we finally committed to making this, let's say, not sponsoring these types of investments in order to have a long-term decarbonization sort of outcome. And then the same sort of thing has to happen with diversity.
And I think that that's an important point to make as well, is that ESG should not ESG decisions should not be made without without diversity, and diversity decisions really should be reflecting of governance and environmental decisions as well. This is about infusing a number of different hats into decision making, and that's very influential as well. Anita, from your perspective, has this panel galvanized your thought on gender, or are you just getting started?
No, absolutely. I really enjoy this panel, right? I mean, listening from you and Kara has been really inspirational, and I think these besides the points that Kara mentioned, right, I think we have to work with academics too, to do some independent research on things like this. I mean, I was talking to one of the King's College professors the other day, and she's an ex-banker, and she mentioned that women 65% of the women would rather speak about their death than investments. That's scary, right? And the reason for that, this is even more interesting. The reason for that is if you look at the product specs that the wealth management firms design, 87% of the pronouns used in the product spec is male oriented, which this is again coming back to the subconsciousness or the subconscious bias that we have, right? I mean, if a wealth advisor comes and positions a product spec to me, which is very male oriented from a pronouns point of view, or the way it's being pitched to me, it might, subconsciously I might start switching off and I might not invest in that product. So, which is also one of the things that women don't take their finances in control, because are the industry products catering to their needs? We talk about gender pay gaps so much. We spoke so much about it, but the compounding, cascading impact of it on the women's pension fund, especially in the UK, is so big. But we haven't spoken as much about that, right? So what I'm trying to come to with this is I think it's important to start analyzing the data and representing the data, but not just in a in one convenient facet. It's about the entire spectrum and the impact assessment of some of these things on different genders, right? I mean, I'm going to throw one more stat and I'm going to stop on that. I mean, if you look at the World Economic Forum stats, 65% of the women above the age of 75, given the pension gap that exists, will live below the poverty line. And that's scary. And the reason of that's coming through is because of the pay gap. But you have to start seeing the impact of some of these challenges is much, much long lasting, right? So I think it's important to do that assessment, exactly like Kara said, but it's about doing the full assessment and the spectrum of it from a long-term impact point of view.
Nita, that's an incredibly important point. Wealth is power. Power is independence. And one thing that women have struggled with, to be really fair, is just like independence. And, it's not just the pay gap, but the compounding of the pay gap, investing it, making sure that your future is, secured for yourself. I mean, it's like if we keep perpetuating, women having to be subject to, let's say, another income or feeling insecure, they won't necessarily reach for, the places where we would like them to go. that's really important.
This was so that was, to me, was the aha moment, was realizing that women are more focused on their debt rather than on their investment side, which is such an underlying aspect to this full industry, the industry being startups, right? So when you have investors that we're trying to get more women into being female angels or VCs, or even from the corporate level, and they're focused on debt, that's what needs to be changed. That's a conversation, a new conversation that we are certainly going to have moving forward. So that, thank you, was a big aha moment. Nita, I'm going to reach out to you to see if we can share that article and some of those links to those stats, because they're extremely eye-opening, not just for women, but I think for society as a whole. I think that's a really great platform for the next question, which is, leaving this panel, what change are you inspired to, and what would that look like?
I could go first. I mean, one of the things that I had pledged last year, which I will continue to work on, is as a part of the Women in Banking and Finance, forum, where I had Senior Business Leaders Charter. And we have quite a few senior business leaders as our members, in this charter. We're all looking to drive and help women entrepreneurs on their journeys. Now, when I say we are helping, it's in the form of becoming their advisors, or becoming their sponsors, or joining their board, or investing in them, right? And it keeps. I mean, that comes back to what I had mentioned earlier. This is literally like one of my key focus areas at this time, and I pledged on this last year, and I continue to work on that.
Thank you.
I mean, similarly for us, it's like, in our own team, again, our objective is to support, young companies and their founders. And so, having a framework that we can share with them, and also to help, promote like the, female founders or diverse founders would be, is something that we're looking to do. I mean, it requires a system. I mean, it's like, I mean, I would say that probably all of us have done, some things on a personal level, but they don't scale. And things that we need to do next are about scaling our efforts. And so that requires some organization. I mean, but again, but on back to like on my own time, it's like I have, in the past, like, basically mentored, spent time like, with uni grads, even high school grads. And it's just on my own time. And I think I need to do more of that, for, female founders, or, students and all that. I mean, and make this a concerted effort. And that's something I should probably bring up to the organization as well. I mean, I think that we probably get too busy with our day jobs, but it's really important for us to contribute back to the community.
It is. And I think that that's an important place as well. With our last panel, we talked about startup boards and startup advisory boards. And I think that that's a place of influence, even from a corporate level. You guys are such powerful and insightful minds. And I hope that that there might be a little influence to have you maybe be interested on advisory boards. But I think that people within organizations have that ear of advice side of things that they might be able to offer out. One of the biggest books that kind of inspired me to these 14 panels was this book here, which is Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Carolyn Criado and Perez. And it talks to a few of the elements that we spoke to today, which is how we've been left out of history and now building an influence. And there's two key concepts that really kind of seem to follow us through each of the questions, and that's about being influencers and offering small changes, as opposed to coming in and banding in and just kind of having this disruptive change, because that's not how we can create change that happens at a long level. Another interesting part is that diversity, gender is not is not its only issue. The diversity lens needs to be added in there, and even a step back, environmental and governance side of things need to kind of happen in cooperation to everything we do. Kara, to your point, I really love the idea of being in a position where you can see everything. As we kind of navigate through our careers, at some point we're going to be able to take a look at things from a larger perspective. And having listened to even at a small level people that are in different situations than ourselves gives us a whole new lens for which to look through. And that kind of adds to our influence as being diversely influenced and impacted even. And the point about being part of the bro culture or moving away from that, asking the tough questions, making sure that you stand up for where your position is in the company, because it's so much easier to navigate life as yourself rather than trying to be somebody else. And I'd like to thank you both for some amazing, amazing insights. The one that I'll leave here, honestly, with the most is the fact that the majority of women take a look at their financial health from a perspective, regardless of their wealth status, from a perspective of debt, rather than from the perspective of investment, and that by nature is from being paid less or perhaps navigating money in a different way. So that's one of those aha moments that it seems that the metrics that we have, that we've discussed today as well, will go through and help us guide. So progression, percentages, actionable accountability was a word that we talked about quite a bit. And I love that word. Access to finance and looking at the ROI, the stats behind investing in these amazing either female founders or companies that are influenced, gender influenced, I think is a very powerful set of metrics that we can look to. And in closing, I just like to kind of give you the floor to see if there's any last minute conversations, questions, things that we might have forgotten that you'd like to include. Nita, we'll start with you.
I think this conversation was really, really interesting. One of the key, we did talk about it, but I think it's, again, an important thing is about driving change at an early stage. I don't think it's fair to expect the next generations to, again, have to fight the similar battles that we have fought. I mean, we have to move the needle ahead. We have to pave the path ahead, right? Just like our prior generations and the brave women who basically paved the path for us, right? So I really think that awareness needs to start at an early age rather than in the corporate life.
Indeed, indeed. And ageism doesn't necessarily have to play a part. Nita, you had mentioned that at the beginning that you were too young. I'm turning 50 this year, and I'm proud of it because I figured that when I was very, very young, that was the age for an effective CEO. So I think that is also an element that we want to kind of play at, and infusing the diversity into our education system is so critical. Kara, any last minute thoughts?
I mean, it's just like Nita spoke very precisely on basically the funnel, but I also don't want to forget like all the women who are present now, who are they should not be just like turfed out, because there's all sorts of corporate actions that are happening all the time, but they have a lot of value to give, and we shouldn't recognize that we can make use of that, in our companies, in society. And so, making sure that we keep them employed and active as long as possible would be, I think, something that we really should think, about.
I think that's great. I like to leave off with this analogy. When I was young, I lived right around the street from my school, and I was running after my friend. I was yelling at the top of my lungs, Hilda, Hilda, Hilda. And I was running, and I got up to her and realized it wasn't her. So I continued running around the corner, yelling at the top of my lungs, Hilda, 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 until I was out of earshot and out of sight. So my advice to any of the ladies out there is just keep running and waving. You'll find where you're going. Thank you so much, Kara. Thank you very much, Nita. This was very empowering and insightful, and I appreciate your time. And I look forward to having this discussion again because I think it's one that needs to be happening and over again. So perhaps in a couple of months we'll meet back up again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.